Hello and welcome to the Chorilosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 230, Enneagram in Ensembles, Classrooms, Music, and Life with Sarah McMahill. Enneagram study has been used to heal families, relationships, workplaces, and so much more. It has also been used by individuals to simply have a better relationship with themselves. In this episode, we explore the possible uses of this system for understanding human motivation in ensembles, classrooms, and even during music making. In this episode, I'm thrilled to sit down with Sarah McMahill for a thought-provoking conversation about the fascinating intersections between Enneagram, music, and personal growth. In the opening segment of the podcast, I make a short presentation on the math of the Enneagram and its implications on group dynamics and classroom management. Then Sarah takes us on a journey through her experiences with this powerful personality framework, sharing how it has deepened her understanding of herself, her students, and her colleagues. Sarah is vulnerable about how the Enneagram provided clarity during challenging moments in her life, including its role in mental and physical well-being. We discuss everything from the alignment of the body's physical centers with Enneagram principles to how understanding stress responses can help manage stage fright and other performance challenges. We even touch on the connections between the Enneagram and music theory, exploring ideas like the tritone as a metaphor for growth and change, and Sarah's creative process in a songwriting cycle inspired by the 9 Enneagram types. So tune in, listen all the way to the end, and have your thinking stimulated and challenged. Then weigh in yourself with your related ideas and experiences on Facebook in the Chorilosophers group or over on Substack at chorilosophy.substack.com. Attention event organizers. Ludus is here to take your events to the next level. Imagine a ticketing platform that's not just about tickets. Ludus offers marketing, fundraising, and even volunteer management, all in one place. It's time to streamline your event management process and impress your attendees. Join the Ludus family today and unlock endless possibilities for your events. Go to ludus.com/chorilosophy and try it out now, free to you. And if you use that link, you'll get the marketing feature free to your customers as well. Nearly 200 people voluntarily chip in every month to make sure that the costs for this show are underwritten. But, of course, it's also an exchange. When you sign up for Patreon or paid Substack memberships, either one, you will get access to my Google folder full of goodies, presentation slides from any presentation that I've done over the last several years. It also has rubrics that I have created for class, for grading episodes, supplemental materials, repertoire lists, so you'll have access to that. Plus, of course, there is the private podcast feed, which you can hear once a month, so you can go to patreon.com/chorilosophy to sign up there for as little as $3 a month, or you can just upgrade your free Substack subscription to a paid Substack subscription. Either way, the money goes to the same place for the same purpose. The producers and inner circle at Patreon are Venture Studios, Brian Long, Angie Schilling, Danelle Eckert, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, and Steve and Kathy Kakacek. We're going to do something weird today on the podcast. We're going to start with math. Some detailed, complicated, high number math. We're going to dive into a fascinating idea related to psychology, the Enneagram, and its implications for classroom or group or choir management. But it's not just any math. We're talking complex, large number math. Are you ready? Let's dive in. People are complicated. The world is made up of people, 8 billion of them. The variability that exists within just one classroom or choir, in terms of motivations for behavior, life experiences, opinions, everything, is staggering. And it doesn't matter if your choir has 12 kids or 112. Your classroom has 25 math students or 2. The number is still so large that in some ways it's incomprehensible. Now, please don't take this the wrong way, but your brain isn't large enough to compute that level of complexity. None of ours are. Trying to do the impossible usually doesn't end well. It's like signing yourself up for an F before you even start. So let's set up the conversation like this, with a thought experiment. Some of you might be familiar with this image. So if you recognize it, if you can see it on my graphics, or if you're watching on YouTube, it is the Enneagram. If you're not familiar with the Enneagram, here's a quick way to think about it. It's not really a personality test. It's more of a motivations for behavior test. Sure, you can take a quiz online, but to really understand it, you've got to dig a little deeper. It's not as simple as figuring out your Harry Potter house on Facebook. It's much more nuanced. For example, thinking about motivations for behavior, I was talking with my wife Beth about Enneagram just this last week. We are both capable of being nurturing people, but what it takes to get me into that place where I'm in a nurturing space for my students and for my kids is different than what gets her into that nurturing space, because we're each motivated by different things. And I know the Enneagram symbol looks kind of out there. Some folks think it's a religious or even occult-like symbol. It's not. While it's popular in some churches, there is no religious connection at all. What it does, though, is help us understand how incredibly complex human behavior actually is. When we observe someone's behavior, we often try to figure out why we did it by applying our own logic. For example, if I had done that, whatever behavior I've observed, if I had done that, what would my reason have been? But here's the problem. That is almost always going to lead you to the wrong answer. There are potentially hundreds of reasons why a person might have done something. And if I guess wrong about their first behavior, I'm completely unprepared to understand the next one. That's the math of human complexity at work. Now, for teachers, the implications should be obvious. For choir directors, also. We stand in front of groups, and I don't think we always understand how complex group behavior can be, leading us to believe that we can really understand and predict it. And I actually think that you can be really good at classroom management, and one of the ways you get really good at it is actually understanding that you don't know. Now, this human complexity that might lead one person to be incomprehensible just gets crazier as we scale up the math. Imagine your choir. If you understand how exponential math works, you know what happens when we multiply all these permutations across a group. Each person's reacting to other people's behaviors, but they don't know the motivations behind those behaviors either, and the result is an astronomical number of possibilities. Billions, even in a small group. Now we're going to lay on top another image and another concept. Have you heard of Dunbar's number? Dunbar's number is a psychological theory backed by research. It explains that because of the complexity of human interaction, our brains are only equipped to maintain relationships at specific levels. At 5 people, we are highly equipped for intimate relationships, close friends or family. At 15 people, we can manage good friends, the ones you'd spend a Saturday evening with or invite to dinner occasionally. At 50 people, we're at a typical tribe size. Think an overnight camp or choir. This is a group size where you might know everyone's name and face, but not much more. At 150 people, we hit the maximum number of meaningful relationships our brains can handle. Beyond that, it's impossible to maintain personal connections. Now, these numbers are not arbitrary. These numbers reflect the way our brains evolved. In traditional hunter-gatherer societies, groups rarely exceeded 150 because that's where our cognitive capacity maxed out. So let's think about that cognitive capacity. For one person, just using the Enneagram as a framework, that's with 9 personality types with 2 possible wings for each of those personality types, that could be 162 possible personality permutations. And that means motivations for why a person might have done the thing you saw them do. And just by going to a group of 10 people, think about my smallest choir is 22. But in a group of 10 people, the permutations would already reach 12 sextillion permutations. At 20 people, we are now at 1.55 times 10 to the 47th power permutations. My biggest group is 100 people, which is 8.94 times 10 to the 307th power, which is just an incomprehensible number. So for me to believe that I really could wrap my head around all of the behaviors and why they are happening there in my classroom of 95, technically, but close to 100 kids would be impossible, and I shouldn't try. I should set up systems of accountability for my classroom management that doesn't attempt to assume that I understand why people are there. Doesn't mean that we don't try to build relationships. Of course we do. But the Enneagram should give us a nice little dose of humility. As a choir director, I can see this reflected in my own experience. Over my 22 years of teaching, I've noticed that my relationships with former students, fall into these categories as well. There's the small handful that I still text regularly, the ones I'd call at any hour in an emergency. Then there's a larger group of good friends who might come back to sing at a summer institute, for example, but who I don't keep in touch with year round. This spectrum also applies to my current students. Think about how much time we spend together in rehearsals, performance, and trips, and yet there's still a limit to how deeply we can get to know each other. So why does all this matter? The Enneagram shows us the incredible complexity within each individual, and Dunbar's number reminds us of the limits of our relationships. Together, these concepts help us to understand why classroom management, especially in large groups, is such a challenge. Imagine trying to navigate billions of potential motivations, trillions in large choirs, reactions and possible behaviors within a single room. It's impossible for one teacher to attribute motivations accurately for every action. That's why frameworks like this are so valuable. They help us stop trying to do the impossible. Instead, focus on what's achievable. In the next segment, Sarah McMahill joins me to dive deeper into the Enneagram and how it impacted her life as a musician and also as a person. At various times over the years in my classroom, at times of great stress amongst the kids in the group, or the adults sometimes in the group, I have initiated Enneagram-based conversations with some of the points that I just shared with you, but it's very difficult for them to visualize this. And so I have created and used in the past a very short and very simple Enneagram-based quiz for groups. It does not require a person to go get tested and find their type, which I do highly recommend you do. Go to enneagraminstitute.com and just pay the $20 and do the test. I think you will find that it is very, very worth it for you. But this doesn't require that. All you have to do is be a Patreon or paid Substack subscriber, and you will be able to find this quiz in my Google Drive of goodies. And it's simply a Google form that will churn out for your group of whatever size your group is, pie charts like a Google form oftentimes does, that will allow the kids or adults in your groups to see visually how diverse the motivating factors for behavior are just within your ensemble alone. And it can be a great starting point for conversations about classroom management, but also about intergroup conflict and conflict resolution. My recommendation to the audience listening to this episode is that we use some of these ideas to make ourselves better, but also to make our classrooms better. How can we create systems that respect this complexity without being overwhelmed by it? Stick around. All right, everyone, I am here with Sarah McMahill. Sarah is a musician and, like myself, an Enneagram lover, and I am really excited. It's been years since I've done any Enneagram episodes on Choreolosophy, so I'm excited to welcome Sarah to learn about some connections between Enneagram and music that are beyond even things that I know, and I consider myself an Enneagram nerd. So, Sarah, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
This will be fun. Why don't you share with us a little bit more about you, your background, what you do every day, and then maybe if you could also share what got you interested in the Enneagram in the first place.
I almost feel like I need to start back in middle school and high school a little bit.
Okay.
Because I was kind of the brunt of a lot of bullying during that time, and the music room was kind of my safe haven. So, my band teacher, my choir teacher, they were all very supportive of me. And so that's kind of where the music comes in for me. So going into college, I was having a lot of mental health issues with some of the stuff that had been going on. And it just seemed to follow me there. And I had a pretty traumatic experience where I just kind of fell rock bottom, and it was in my process of getting out of that part of my life was when the Enneagram came into play. My mom originally learned about it and was trying to tell me some things about it and how some of the observations that she was making about some of my behavior, and I started reading about it. It's like, and my mom had one clue that I might be a 6 through one of the classes that was offered through the Enneagram Institute, is the psychic structures. And so she was telling me about the 6 for that. And then I got a book by Don Riso and Russ Hudson called Personality Types. And I was reading through the different health level descriptions there. And when I got to the lowest health level of the type 6, I just broke down. Because that was me. That was where I was at.
That
And
is
so that
interesting.
was
The list of resources that this podcast has generated around it continues to grow. You can, of course, for free, go use the Vocal Pedagogy Suite or the Music Literacy Suite anytime you'd like. Those are sub pages on my website that keep all of those episodes on those two topics organized. So if you are ever wanting to do a deep dive on teaching your kids to read music or sing well, kind of like our main job, you can go there to the website and find those. Quick Google search also will help you find those. And of course, the list of discounts on incredibly helpful products for music educators is also substantial. You can go to 3minutetheory.com and get 15% off with the promo code there. And of course, Sight Reading Factory. Every time you renew your membership for yourself and your student memberships, you can knock 10% off every time you do checkout there. Sightreadingfactory.com, which is a huge benefit to you because it's the best program out there, but also you get a discount, and all of those promo code uses help support this show as well. Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I would just when
go ahead.
you got to that part of your story, had a reaction because that's how I felt when I read eights. When I found I got because I took classes on it and like graduate level courses through my school district on the Enneagram, and when I got to the chapter about eights and I read it, I was weeping.
Mhm.
I felt like I had never been understood by even the closest people to me in my life, brothers, sisters, spouse, best friends. I felt seen by that description for the first time in my life. Is that kind of what you mean by having that strong reaction when you read it?
That is a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
The other part was when I read that, it's like, oh my gosh, I just need to apologize to myself back then. It's like,
Oh,
I'm so
yes.
sorry
Yes.
I put
Uh-huh.
myself through that. And it takes effort to see that shadow within myself and not get sucked into it.
Yeah.
And to see that there are other options than going down back into that level again.
Right. Yeah, that's really good. It's interesting because you and I, it sounds
Yeah.
like we came to Enneagram for different reasons, but had some very similar experiences with it. So before we get too far into this, I want to not
Mhm.
assume that anyone listening to the show right now already has a good grasp on what Enneagram is. So I don't want to go, we've kind of shared some of our emotional connections to it already. But let's
Mhm.
say you run into somebody, just a rando on the street, and they say, you're into Enneagram. Oh, cool. What's that? How do you describe it to a person who knows nothing about it? How would you describe it in kind of that bullet point form?
It is a useful tool to be able to uh, figure out what motivates your behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the basic thing I'll just say is like it's that useful tool.
I want to get your take on this too, because I kind of still, while we're early in the episode of talking about this, because I know when I first saw Enneagram stuff, my first reaction was, this is a bunch of like tree hugging hippie woo woo out there stuff. Like this is for people who, collect crystals and stuff, and nothing there's anything wrong with that. But my point is, I put it in a box based on what it looks like, mostly because of those, the heptagram, the shape, and it kind of looks like a satanic symbol. And I know that there are a lot of people who think that. I've heard that comment a lot from people just because of the way it looks. And so, how would you respond to that if people think, oh, well, this some kind of hidden religious thing, or like how would you explain that to people?
The Enneagram is not a religious thing.
Right.
It can be helpful in certain spiritual aspects, but there's no specific religion that it is associated with.
Right. Right. I just wanted to get that out of the way because of
Yes.
course, I'm going to use some graphics and stuff for this episode, and I know that as soon as you put that up there, people they see that image, and they kind of, I think they kind of think of the pentagram, of like kind of that satanic symbol and stuff. And so when I dug into it a little bit more, I was actually very comforted by how humble the practitioners and the authors of the books that I read were with what it's good for and what it's not good for. So another comparison I will draw and see what you think is like to other types of personality tests that claim to be able to put you in a personality box if you just take their quiz, etc. And Enneagram, the authors at least that I came across, were very careful to say that's not really what we're doing, and this is not like a scientifically, but like we're not trying to do science here. This is a tool for you to understand and find language for yourself, to explain yourself to others. Is that kind of something
Exactly.
is that how you come across it as well?
Exactly. And that was funny. You asked me for the general description. That's exactly what I said. It is a
Mhm.
useful tool to help
Yeah.
you understand your motivations.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that's why I started crying when I
Yeah.
first read the eight, is because I felt like I had never been able to explain myself well to people. And it wasn't that and it was that the Enneagram literature that I read gave me the tools and gave me the language to explain, this thing you see about me, what's really motivating me to do those things is XYZ. It doesn't look like that, but that's what's really going on. So I found it very, very valuable. I'd like to, if we could, kind of dig into some of the ways that you use Enneagram now, because this is what really sparked my interest in having you on the show to ask some of these questions. Because I know that involve Enneagram in music making. I know that you think about how the connections between Enneagram and health. I know that you think about connections between Enneagram and different aspects of even our physical well-being, and different ways you connect these things, which I found all of that really interesting. So I think if we could, maybe we could kind of start in some of those physical things. I've got a note here. It says something about even like myofascial release. How does talk about that? That's new to me. Are you a director new to the profession? Or are you a seasoned director who is in a new place? One of my favorite tips for generating interest in the program and to instill buy-in is to plan a trip. There are so many options. You can go to Orlando, you can go to Ireland, or you can perform in a parade or a theme park. You can even take the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York. Wherever you end up, not only will your current crew look forward to the trip, but younger students will count the days until it's their turn to go. If you have no idea where to start, connect with Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com.
First off, it's small fascial release. So the fascia is the connective tissue that surrounds more than just the muscles, which is what the myo means, but it holds our entire body together. And part how that comes into play is when I was a teenager and into my 20s, I was in debilitating pain.
Mm.
And we just could not find out what was going on. And we eventually figured out that my right hip was actually rotated inwards and crushing some of my internal organs. And we found this out because of a myofascial therapist.
Oh, okay.
And with the work that she did, she was able to adjust my hip and my sacrum and my sacroiliac joint to the point where I started to feel a little bit more confident in my body and in myself. Because of how that helped me, I knew that that was something that I wanted to go further into, and seeing what I could do to help to continue to help my own body, but I wanted to be able to help other musicians and vocalists to be able to continue to do the music however that comes out for them, and to be able to make that assessment of their own body. But okay, can they get the air in their lungs? Are they having too much inhibitions in their chest area? So that's kind of where that kind of comes, the body work kind of comes in. When I took a women's health seminar. It was with John Barnes. He had a sacrum that he had a plastic sacrum in his hand. And when I saw that, I suddenly realized, wait a second, the sacrum is in a very similar image to the Enneagram. And that was when the wheels started to turn for me. It's like,
Okay, so and I just want to make sure I'm tracking you and what exactly you're trying to communicate here, just so I don't put words in your mouth. So you always tell me if I say
yeah,
this
yeah.
wrong. Okay,
Okay.
so are you saying that Enneagram then is a metaphor for this, or are you saying there is direct like application of ways that you think about Enneagram as a way to contribute to your physical health, or is this kind of like a mind body connection idea where our physical health can't be separated from our mental health? Is that kind of where you're coming from too?
That's what I came to, is that it is all connected.
I see.
It is
Yep. Okay.
all woven together. We cannot separate out our body from our heart, from our mind.
Yes. Okay. Now I understand what you're
Yes.
saying. If I were to take some, because I completely agree, there's kind of a mythology that is separate then from mental health, or that is separate from our spiritual health even. But really the body is one system. And so I think what you're saying is that Enneagram then is a way to help understand your inner world a little bit better. Are there ways that has been that you could share with us about how that has played out in your health over the last few years?
Early on in during my college years, and
Mm-hmm.
was seeing that myofascial therapist, and I was also questioning my sexuality at the time. And during one of our sessions, she was working on my neck, and there's just so much tension in here. And I finally decided, you know what? I think I'll have my massage therapist be the first person I'm going to come out to. As soon
Okay.
as I came out to her, my neck just completely straightened out and loosened up, and it was such a fascinating experience for me.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Tell us more. Tell
yes.
us more. And were you into Enneagram at that time yet?
I had started learning about it, though I did not do the deep dive into it until, what was that, 2011?
I see. Okay. So you're getting this massage, and you come out regarding your sexuality, and you obviously that was a weight lifted off of you, but
Oh,
it
yes.
took this physical pain and just dissolved it. What was that like
Hmm.
for you?
It was a relief.
Hmm.
It was an absolute relief. It actually also felt like that I had more of my voice, too.
Mm. Hmm.
And that is something that I know that I had struggled with, is like, even though I did get that initial vocal scholarship when I was initially went to Doane College, went there for 2 years, and got the vocal scholarship and with the clarinet scholarship. But e even then, even though I got them, I could still tell that there is just a lot of tension in that neck, in my throat, and there are times when it just felt like that I couldn't get anything out.
Yeah. Yeah. That is fascinating. Thank you for sharing that vulnerable story, because
Yeah.
I think uh, um, so much of the pain, ailment, um, things that we call physical health. Like I can't bend my right leg, or I feel tension in my neck, like you said, or I've got back pain, or whatever. It's not to say that those things don't exist, because there are physical, ailments, etc.
Mhm.
But I wonder how, if people would be very surprised sometimes to realize how much of those things they feel in their body are really expressions of the mind, through anxiety, through lack of inner peace. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like in your situation, almost like an internal dissonance with who you are versus what you're able to express out into the world.
Oh,
It's
yes.
and I think obviously there's connections there to music as well. Like music is one of the things that we use to help bring our inner self into harmony as well. But of course, the Enneagram, at least for me, was a way for me to start bringing those pieces together, so to speak, the head, heart, the body, etc. So yeah, that's really, really interesting. Do you have, if, I don't want to cut you off. Do you have any other stories to share about those types of things? Is that, or were you just a believer at that point?
I got to be more of a believer with that. One thing I do want to make sure to put out there is that even though I do see those connections between the physical and the mental and the spiritual, there are still some diseases, some other physicalities that do happen that are out of our control. And
Of
so
course.
it's the work with someone else to say, okay, is this something that has a connection here, or is there something else going on? So you need to have that conversation with a medical professional, as well as someone who can help assist to see if there might be something further, if there's another mental or spiritual thing else that might be going along with it.
Yes, thank you for adding
So
that. Yes, folks, please do not take
yeah,
medical advice here on the Corolosophy
yeah,
podcast.
yes, yes.
Yeah, no,
Right.
you're exactly right. That is really good. Okay,
Yeah.
so if we could now, let's get into the music stuff. That is, of course, the
Okay.
main reason that we do this show here.
Hmm.
And so I was also fascinated by your email to see some connections between music and the Enneagram that I was not aware of. So, what should music teachers know about the Enneagram?
So this was actually a recent learning of mine that the Silverfish scale can be mapped onto the Enneagram. And so the um 9 would be doe, but you can kind of see here that doe is right where type 9 is.
Okay. Yep.
And then it kind of goes around um the circle there. So you have doe at 9, Ray at 1, me at 2, and then 3 and 6 are both shock points, and that's what the X means.
I don't recognize that name that starts with a G. Gurdjieff?
Gurdjieff.
Gurdjieff.
Yes, his George Ivanovich Gurdjieff is the person of in the what was the time period in the late 1800s who did the teachings about the Enneagram. Armenian, I think.
Okay.
But he traveled the world and he did a lot of he's written some books. There's the In Search of Being and the Fourth Way. Um, but his student Jean de Saltzman, I've had some classes with Russ Hudson, and Russ Hudson was directly taught from Jean de Saltzman. So that's kind of a bit of that history there.
Okay. Now, are they primarily Enneagram teachers or are they musicians?
Russ Hudson is actually both.
Okay.
He,
Yeah.
he was a musician for a while, but then became an Enneagram teacher, and he's very well known. He was the founder of the Enneagram Institute.
Got it. Okay. So then
Yes.
let's talk more about this application here of
Hmm.
Enneagram to the scale. Is that just a novelty or is there a practical application that he is suggesting here?
It's also a connection between the chakra points too. So each of the chakras that we have, uh, the sacral chakra, the one that's just below our belly button, and then there's our heart chakra, our throat chakra, um, the middle of the forehead, the top of the head. They each have a sound associated to it. But it's something that I'm still kind of playing with and trying to understand a little bit more myself.
Okay, good. And then underneath that image, I see something about the octave too, which is interesting. The spiralization of the octave. He says that the octave is how all growth and change manifests.
Mm-hmm.
The shock points are important to keep things progressing in a kind of spiral way. So, like the idea that it's one I think say in my classroom all the time, there are infinity octaves. And so we can think about the amount of energy that is being accumulated as each octave increases. It sounds like almost like that's kind of what he's suggesting, is that there's it's not a straight. I like at the bottom it says there's no straight line in any natural form and growth. And so we think of sometimes a straight, an octave is one note right above the other one on the musical staff in Western notation, but in reality there's no straight line between octaves. It's just an increase of energy, an increase of speed. Do you think, does that sound like I'm kind of on the right track of this kind of thing?
I believe so. Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's really interesting. I can see applications.
So the person who I got this from, there are some things in here that he doesn't exactly agree with either, but this
Okay.
is just
Yep.
kind of the basis of what he's wanted to get this out there first. So
Yeah. So of course, a small percentage of people are actually looking at the video. Most people are listening. So I'm going to go ahead and read some stuff again, if that's okay. Unless you
yeah,
want to read some stuff.
go ahead.
Okay. So it's then says, so we see that the tritone in the major scale, for example, F between F and B, are there at those half step points. So that's those shock points. Therefore, I
Yep.
submit that the tritone or diminished fifth augmented fourth interval is in fact the lever or spring in the octave, which, well, and that makes sense mathematically too. The tritone is the exact center um,
Yeah.
of the octave, which brings about the necessary changes to keep the music flowing and growing, because the tritone is the salient feature in the dominant seventh chord, for example. We always find it in situations that require resolution. Therefore, any kind of modulation to a new key, which in life can symbolize the change to a new territory, like moving to a new place or finding a new work situation, any new growth involves the tritone, as we use dominant seven chords to set up the new key. That is really interesting. So here's my idea. So in the Enneagram, there is this idea of, now it's been so long since I took the class, you could probably help me with the terminology, but there's this idea that when I am in my healthy emotional state, I might be one number, but then I can revert to a number on the other side of the circle when I'm in stress. Do you know what I'm talking about from Enneagram?
You don't exactly revert per se.
Okay.
It is more of as you go down in levels of health levels, you might start to exhibit some behaviors from one of the wing, or not the wings, but the lines.
Right. And isn't it like
But you're
usually
still,
isn't it across the figure from your normal number?
it would be the line of stress, essentially.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
uh, so so for me, my line of stress is I can go into the low side of 3 because I'm a 6.
Right. Okay. Yes. Yeah. That's kind of what I was referring to.
So
Yeah.
so so but even though I can exhibit some of those behaviors, you still have your own base type.
Right. I see.
And
Okay.
so it's always coming back to that base, and you can get to the lowest part of your own type at some
Yes.
point.
Yes. 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 I get it. All right. So,
Okay.
okay. So
And
no, go ahead.
and for what it's worth, if people wanted to learn more about those different levels of the health and some of the really deeper descriptions, as I said, the personality types, for people who can see this, is personality types using the Enneagram for self-discovery, Don Riso, Russ Hudson.
Yes,
So,
the Don Riso stuff is great. In fact, I have one of his Enneagram Institute website pages pulled up right behind your face on my computer. Really good stuff. So when so here was my harebrained idea, and this again is
okay.
a new concept to me too. And I know you're working
Mhm.
out some of the music connections too. But with that tritone being the spiral of, or the impetus, the shock for continued growth, because you can't, well, can't is the wrong word of music theory, but you don't want to typically have a musical line that starts at the tonic and ends with the tritone. With the tritone
Hmm.
wants you to resolve it, like it wants you to continue cycling through, so to speak. Even you can even think about the circle of fifths in music theory, of like, wanting to continue to cycle through to the next level, so to speak. I almost feel like that could be compared to our Enneagram traits in stress. That we don't want to stay there. We don't want to stay in those places of stress. We want to be in our healthy state. We feel those moments of stress, which then spur us to grow. They spur us to cycle back through. And yeah, that's kind of metaphorical, but it's also not really. It's also like what I can think of all the times when in my life when I've fallen down in mental health levels, and how toxic I become when I am not the best version of myself. And my goodness, that's like me sitting on my tritone. I don't want to sit there. I want to move through it. What do you think about my random idea here?
That makes sense. The other thing that just kind of went through my head as you were talking about that is I could also see how that could play a part in stage fright. So when you do go down to stress, you also kind of go into some of those basic instincts. And I think that's a part of the whole stage fright can show up so many different ways. The fight, flight, freeze. For me, I tend to freeze. And I'm sure you've probably also seen the flight from people who've just kind of run off the stage.
Students, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
uh-huh.
I don't know if very many people who would fight on stage, but yeah.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
but
Usually, probably because usually they wouldn't even be on the stage in the first place if that was going to be their
mhm.
reaction. It's a selection bias there, maybe.
Thinking of how the instincts might play in with that when people are under stress, some of their those basic instincts do kind of come out.
Yeah. Now, curiosity, since you were vulnerable before, if it's okay, you don't have to answer this, but was stage fright a big
Hmm.
issue for you as a kid too, singing? Were you always a brave singer?
I'm not always a brave singer.
Mm-hmm.
And there were times in which my voice just kind of locked up on me and it just didn't want to come out whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I would just freeze, essentially, is what I
Yeah.
that was my most tendency to do.
And was that true as a
Um,
kid too? Like when you were a kid as well?
Not as often then.
Oh, okay.
So that was kind of an interesting pattern for me when I'm thinking about that.
I think maybe a way we could summarize that for people is that these levels of health that Enneagram helps you see, one final direction, which is you wrote a set of like a song cycle,
Yeah,
which I found fascinating. I saw it on your website, based on each of the nine. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
yeah.
I think that's what I saw. Each of the nine level or nine parts of the wheel, so to speak, and you have a song for each of them.
Yes,
Uh,
I do.
Tell us about that.
So let's see, it was back in when did I do the workshop? 2021, I think it was. I did an online Enneagram workshop with another Enneagram person, Roland Legg, and we wanted to include music with that. And we were trying to figure out, well, what are we going to do with the whole copyright stuff? And not entirely certain how to navigate that. So I thought, what the heck? I'm just gonna write the songs myself and do some recording. And so that's what I ended up doing. I wrote up the vote. I actually did a bunch of research too, because I know about my type and what it's like for me, but being able to listen to other types talk about their experiences, and from that I was able to write up lyrics for that type. And then I just kept on repeating that back to myself over and over and over again, kind of really getting that into my body and figuring out how to translate that into music.
Hmm.
And it was really fascinating is I really got into the energy of all of the nine types, and I found myself needing to go back to the three multiple different times because that kind of gave me the energy to keep on doing. Because that's what the
Interesting.
three is all about,
Yeah.
is that constant motion, that constant doing. And that helped me to not stagnate when I was working on the four or the five or the nine, because those are the withdrawn types.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, I thought that was so fascinating when
And so you felt yourself feeling like you were getting into character of each of the nine.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's interesting. And I would imagine that would also have led you down a kind of a rabbit hole, so to speak, of quite a bit of extra research into those other nine than say maybe the or the other eight, I guess.
Mhm.
Then maybe the typical Enneagram reader would, because like most people go to Enneagram to understand themselves. And maybe it would be nice if more of us would spend more time trying to understand everybody through those things. Thoughts about that?
And that's the point of it. It's like it
Yeah.
gives us a chance to learn more about each other. And yeah, I see a whole lack of understanding and wanting to listen to other people out there these days. And it breaks my heart because we are all so beautiful in our own right.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree, and
And
I would say I echo that concern because I think one of the things that Enneagram does is, like I said before, with my classroom as an example, it helps us understand how little we actually would know just from looking at a person.
yeah,
It's not magic. Enneagram's not a magic thing. It's just a great way to visualize all these things. And when you start to think about nine categories, but then there's also the wings. So you've got like each of the nine, and then there's plus two more for each. And then you also have all those levels of health that can bring someone's behavior into different, it's almost infinite when you start going
yeah.
down that rabbit hole. And then people think they can look at somebody's post on Facebook, for example, and know who they are.
And you really don't.
You don't know anything. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's just one tiny little bit of that person,
Hmm.
and we don't know where they're coming from.
Right.
We can't hear the tone of their voice because it's a post. It's writing.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And that could come in so many different ways. Like I was thinking about that's the other day when I was texting my father-in-law about whether or not he could bring over the lawnmower for his lawnmower because ours is broken. And and of course in a text message it's hard to tell, tone of voice, like you just said. And he replies, well, I'm actually in Virginia, I'm in Missouri. So I said, okay, I'm going to assume that means you can't bring over the lawnmower. But, but in, um, but in a text message, and then all I get back is, yep. But like, I don't know, like, does he get my joke? I can't tell. Like, I can't tell. It's just a text message. And of course I have to assume in that moment, I have to assume the best because like I don't think he's offended by me asking, that kind of thing. But we
Mhm.
do that to each other. We try to. I think we try to apply our um, our inner insecurities onto others so that we don't have to try to understand them. And Enneagram is such a great tool for that.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, and we just need to take the time to actually be aware of what's going on inside of us so we can then realize, oh, I think I'm projecting. Sorry
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's really good. That's really good. Yeah, Sarah, this has been really interesting, and I think if nothing else, folks who don't know Enneagram will hopefully be inspired to dive in because they can learn. And of course, as you know, most of the listeners here are music educators. To find some connections between the music and the Enneagram, but also find connections between ways they can see their colleagues and students as more fully human because that's what it did for me. I'll give you the final
Yeah.
word on that, and then if you could also share with us how we can find your songs.
So they should be on my website. So that's sarahmc.net. So that's SARAHMC.net. and so there are three sections to it there. So you'll find the Heart to Hands Small Fashion Massage, the Kintsugi Studios and Publications, and then the Dragonfly Enneagram Center. So this kind of all lumped together in the whole wellness weaving section, but the Kintsugi is the place where you would find music and
That's
all
great.
that.
That's great. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me.
So, yep, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one at Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choirosophy checkout code, and of course now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choirosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.